Hi, everyone. Welcome to this new podcast, Your Life Projectized with Parmjeet. I'm your host. So this podcast was previously called Parmjeet Speaks, and a lot of you may be familiar with that. But again, I did do a little bit of rebranding, and we did take a long hiatus, but we are officially back. And today I have a very special guest on the line for this episode, episode 15. I have Nigel Smith. And Nigel, I'm going to pass it over to you so you could introduce yourself. And for the folks that are listening in, this episode title is called Unlocking the People Puzzle in Your Projects, of which Nigel is an expert. So Nigel, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks so much, Palm. I wouldn't call myself an expert at all, but yeah, unlocking the people puzzle in your projects. I mean, clearly we've all been there. It's all a relationship type thing. So I started my career as a project manager back in the automotive industry in the UK, quite a while ago. It was certainly last century. Very command and control, task orientated environment. But I actually started as an engineer, and then I think project management chose me rather than me choosing it. I became your archetypal accidental project manager, just fell into that particular role and did it for a number of years. Moved out of the automotive industry into the world of business enterprise software. So worked as an IT project manager across various industries. When I started to work across different disciplines and different industries, meeting different people, I understood how that people puzzle started to come together. I'm currently working for a US software company, SiteTracker, headquartered out of New Jersey on the east coast of the US. Thought you might like that.
Yay, New Jersey.
I live in a place near Birmingham in the Midlands in the UK. Nearest other notable landmark, I guess, is Stratford upon Avon, which is literally like 30 minutes away.
Yeah.
No, I never go there, but I know it's a favourite destination of most people that do come to the UK. So I've been practicing project management. I call it practicing because I'm still not where I want to be with it, but I'm still getting better every day for the best part of 25 or so years. And I love it because of the variety it gives, the new challenges, and of course, the things that you learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nigel, as you were talking, I totally forgot. We should celebrate because I think you are my very first UK guest speaker.
Wow.
Yeah, on
Wow.
this podcast. So,
Yeah.
and and you're also the first one on our first YouTube episode. So,
Oh, excellent. I think that's because you turned down the expenses for me to come and visit you last week. Is that right?
that's exactly what it was.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, and of course you mentioned New Jersey, and for folks that are listening, so of course I have a special place in my heart for New Jersey because New Jersey is where I grew up. So let's go ahead and get into it, Nigel, because I know a lot of folks who are listening in are going to be really excited to understand your experiences, with the different types of individuals or different types of, I guess, personality types that you've identified
Yeah.
in projects. And I know we were previously speaking, and you said that in your experience, managing several projects in several different industries, you've identified four key roles, right? So the commander, the cheerleader, the care, and the critical thinker. And I believe you've also presented this exact topic, and if I'm saying this correctly, in Atlanta, and I believe I was there in Atlanta, right? When you presented this
Yeah,
topic?
yeah. And
Okay.
I wonder if folks can guess what particular behavioural style you were. But yeah, I have to say it's not my particular model, Palmjeet, but it is based off for those folks that are familiar, the DISC profiling method, which is hugely powerful, a great self-awareness and EQ tool. And it certainly made me very self-aware. I think that's one of the secrets. When you understand yourself very well, you can start to understand people. But fundamentally, the whole basis of the model splits people into predominantly four zones. We're not exclusively these four types, but you've got your extroverts and you've got your introverts, but you've also got your task dimension and you've got your relationship dimension. So, for example, the commander is a very extrovert, task-orientated individual, whereas the cheerleader is the very extrovert, people-focused. Yeah, get those pom-poms out. I think I stole them back off you, didn't I, from Atlanta? And extroverts, fast-paced, live for today, want to do everything very, very quickly, don't really want detail, just want summaries and solutions. But when you come down the line into the more introvert side of things, again, on the people side, you've got the carers, so that they're very people focused on harmony and security. Then on the opposite side, on the introverts, task orientated individuals, you've got the critical thinkers. I always call them the spell checkers of your project in that way. And each of the four styles is highly desirable to have in a team because, of course, diversity is key.
Yeah.
One style of one type of person across the whole team would be pretty disastrous, really. It probably wouldn't be very productive at all. And you do need that. If you're familiar with the Tuckman model, the forming, storming, norming, and
Mm-hmm.
performing, that storming phase, we got all these creative things coming out, is possibly driven by these different interchangeable types. But yeah, fundamentally, you've got your commanders, who are your sort of compass setters, if you will. They set the North Star of where the project's happening. They sort of their mantra would be bold, be brief, be gone. They pretty much shoot from the hip most of the time, but they are willing to make the unpopular decisions. Then you've got the cheerleaders, which I guess is you again, Palm, rah rah. And these guys are the organizational secret persuaders. They get people on board, very playful, optimistic, not necessarily detail orientated. These guys pretty much want to have a lot of fun. Again, very fast paced, very flamboyant, dress very smartly, and they have all the nice things in life because it's about how they want to be seen and perceived. Popularity is very key for them. For the Ds, or rather the disc D, which is the extrovert, task orientated, it's all about getting results. And then as you come down below the line to the carers, the more introverted, slower paced, more reserved, relationship focused individuals, this is all about harmony and security. They're the guys that are going to get that work done. The cheerleaders are the guys that are going to persuade everyone to do the work right, and if you like, those carers are the ones that are going to make sure that work happens. And then when we swing around to the spell checkers, your task oriented
Yeah.
introverts, they're the guys that are going to scientifically and forensically make sure you follow the right process, tick all and check all the right boxes. Very good for quality, precision, and accuracy. And of course, all projects need all of those four independent styles to come together and work in harmony.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nigel, thank you for sharing that. And so as you were talking, I was thinking about the different people in my projects, right?
Okay.
And so I was thinking about the commander and
Yeah.
the critical thinker. A lot of my sponsors, or a lot of IT directors that I've worked with, or maybe the director in an organization, I've found that a lot of them tend to lean more towards those types of, I guess, personality traits, if you will.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's not exclusively that way, but I can understand why that could be the case because, with the more task orientated individuals, it's going to be about the process, it's going to be about results, it's going to be about the bottom line, it's going to be about detail and quality. So that sort of does fit in with that sort of task narrative, if you will, but it's not exclusive because although you might have strong preferences of one of the four styles in your behavioral style, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do any of the other three styles. It just takes a lot more effort, energy, and work to achieve that. So very often we'll always move towards our more default style because that's where we're most comfortable. And
Yeah.
very often if we're in a job or a career which has those same drivers which attract us to it in that way, it's probably a good fit. So, for example, some folks that might struggle in the work environment, if you're in a particularly high-paced sales environment, which pretty much speaks to the cheerleaders, the
Yeah.
very fast-paced, want to get stuff done, but it's all about relationships and sort of building that network of people. Then it's going to be very difficult for someone who's more introvert in nature,
Yeah.
generally speaking, because they're not going to want to be very verbal. They're not going to want to stand out too much. And particularly for someone that's very detail orientated, they would find it very hard to let go of the detail and be, I guess, politician-like, and we're in the land of elections right now, aren't we, on both sides of the Atlantic? They very much just chunk up what they say and don't go particularly detailed. So those are some of the challenges you can face. I mean, some of the big challenges, of course, are the sort of the pace between fast and slow, extrovert to introvert. Very often you can get conflict because the extroverts will see that the introverts are just working far too slowly. But
Yeah.
conversely, on the other side of the coin, the introvert people or more reserved people are saying, these guys are just going too fast. They're missing all the detail. They're going to make mistakes. So, there is a bit of common ground. And fundamentally, what I believe is that once you're aware of your own personal style and preferences, okay, then you can start to explore the people around you, like some of the people that you've mentioned. And fundamentally, one of the big key takeaways from me is if you need to get something out of that other person to support your project or your outcome, don't treat them the way that you want to be treated. You have to treat them the way they want to be treated. So, for example, if you're, a critical thinker and you're doing all the ones and the noughts and checking all the boxes, you need to engage with a high energy cheerleader. You've got to let go of yourself a little bit. You've got to speed up. You've got to have a bit of fun, some of the small talk, and that would probably start to bridge that barrier between those two domains, because then that other person's more likely to come towards you. If you go to them with a lot of detail and do things very slowly and give them massive bullet lists and massive emails, well, frankly, a cheerleader and a commander to that meaning is not going to read anything more than probably 3 lines of an email. So if you want something done, ask for it in those top 3 lines. So it is about adapting to the style of that other style if you can see the way that people are different. And again, once you get into that DISC process, you can begin to realize that people are predictably different. They behave in certain ways based on, generally speaking, what their DISC profile throws up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because as you were talking again, I was thinking about some of the interactions that I've had, right, in my projects. And I'm very much a detail-oriented person, but I also give a lot of detail in my emails. I just can't help it. That's just how I am. I give a lot of detail, but I realized at some point in my career, right, when I'm interacting with executives, they don't want all that detail. They get so many emails every day, right? They don't have the time to read a lengthy email. They just want the highlights, right? I give it to them, I give them a pretty picture, show them the highlights, what's working, what's not working, what is there something that is of concern that they could address. And I so definitely see that across my projects.
Excellent. I mean, yeah, you're right, because, for example, the commanders, they want headlines, not storylines. They want
Yeah.
solutions, not problems. I'm guessing here as well, Parmjit, because you must have a bit of an inner conflict, I'm sort of guessing, because on the one hand, I sort of see you as the cheerleader, but to hear you say that you're a very detail-orientated person, and I sort of get that as well. So at some point in what you do, you must have an inner conflict of, I've got to do all this and it takes time, but actually, I want to have fun doing this over here. And it's entirely possible that within each of our profiles, because they're all generally going to be different, you
Yeah.
could have sort of a high cheerleader and a high critical thinker. And it's just something that you need to manage on occasion. I don't know whether you sort of that resonates with you at all in terms of sometimes when you're working, when you feel, actually, I want to have fun, but I've got to go off and do this research or this revision or wherever it is. Those
Yeah.
type of things.
Oh, I do quite often. And it's something that I on a regular basis, that I'm just understanding these different things about my personality. But I think it's so important that you mentioned, right? I have a tendency, I've always had a tendency to say, I want to be treated, or I want to treat people the way I would want to be treated. But you
Mhm.
mentioned something that is so important, especially in business. We have to meet people where they are, and right, and we have to communicate with people in the way that they like to be communicated with. Like, I mean, I'll give you another example. I'm a millennial, and I preface what I say that to say, a lot of folks think that millennials, we are all about technology and, texting and social media and all that. Despite the fact that I'm on all social media platforms, despite the fact that I do text, I prefer a phone call. And
Mhm.
oftentimes I'm so overwhelmed by technology that sometimes I just want to unplug and not be reachable. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I sort of get that. That's really quite interesting. Of course, you mentioned you're a millennial. I
yeah.
think I'm a Gen X. That's probably the one before. No, the Gen Y. I don't know, but I've read research somewhere that says there's probably five of those different generational types in the workforce today, and they each have their own nuances, preferences, and all these sort of things. And of course, technology, when you think about it, is going to be most utilized and inherited and put to good use by those that are in that particular generation. So, the older types like me, a bit more technophobe, takes us a little bit longer to get set up and things. But with that said, a lot of the stuff that Disc portrays is fairly standard across these type of things. So, for instance, you talk about technology. So,
Yeah.
generally speaking, we do a lot of our business, don't we, online? I mean, we're live on, well, being recorded, of course, but we're online now, so to speak. Now, generally speaking, most of us have been to Zoom meetings or Teams meetings, and we often find the folk that just turn up on time, ready to go, probably camera off, muted. And those are likely to be more of your introvert brigade because they don't want to arrive early for the small talk. They don't
Yeah.
necessarily want to be seen. They probably don't want to be at the meeting. But I have to say, certainly for virtual communication, and you might know this anyway, Parmjit, through all your great work through the NSA, that generally speaking, you have to be on camera
Yeah.
when you're virtual because actually your body language, your expressions, your gestures say more than the words that leave your mouth. So, and it's very difficult to get trust with someone virtually online if you can't see them and you can't see the eye contacts and those sort of things. Whereas the more extravagant extroverts online, generally speaking, will be camera on, unmuted, talking away, possibly not necessarily be on time. Certainly the cheerleaders tend to leave it a bit late because they're so distracted doing other things. The commanders might be there on time because they time is very important for them. They just want to get into the meeting and get everything done. But there's lots of things that go on in this world, and it's interesting what you say about originally you talked about treating people the way that you want to be treated.
Yeah.
And I was part of the webinar you so not the webinar, it was a live event, wasn't it? Live event in Atlanta is one of those questions that I ask in the room. Got some really nice software up on the screen, and people vote to say, should you treat people the way that you want to be treated? And generally speaking, it's 80-20, the good old Pareto of 80% of people say, yes, please treat me the way I want to be treated.
Yeah.
And then I have the rest of the presentation stroke workshop to convince everybody actually they're wrong. And what you need to do is treat people the way they want to be treated. Because if we had a world full of just ourselves, if you can imagine that, I mean, it would be a horrible thought, just a world full of myself, to be quite honest. Probably wouldn't be very productive at all. I've got this uh, image in my mind of all those Agent Smiths from the Matrix film, from those big fight scenes. Complete all the same. There's no diversity. There's no mix,
Yeah.
and therefore, the key thing is it is a highly developed EQ for that self-awareness about yourself. Once you understand you and you take off, that breastplate and just bear yourself in true authenticity and be that little bit more vulnerable, allow people to see you as you are, understand yourself as you are, you will move towards people naturally. And if you can understand what makes them tick, because as I said, they are predictably different, understand what they need and how to approach them, how to communicate with them, then very often you'll start to develop great working relationships. Now, I did say at the start of this talk earlier that I started my life in a very task orientated, is very
Mhm.
man dominated um, uh, automotive industry, and that wasn't a very relational business. So I found myself almost on that, if you like, task side of the DISC equation, and it wasn't until I left that world into the more relational side of general business, that I realized that whilst the task is important, the relationship part is even more important. And I come to realize that if you get the relationship part correct, the task part becomes that much easier. But certainly for the first part of my career, it was all the wrong way around. And it was all about, good old command and control, telling people what to do. And, and it was also these industries were sort of read like a bit of a fear culture or a blame culture. So you felt as though you had to stay in line and you couldn't challenge and those type of things. So I was so glad to be liberated from it and realize that I wasn't a great fit in that, but I'm a better fit in more relational businesses where, yeah, the task is important, but it's how it gets done. And you do that by developing meaningful relationships.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think relationship building is so important. And that actually so makes me think of something, Nigel. So in today's world, right? So I know after COVID, a lot of folks now work remotely, or especially in our industry, right? In project management, a lot of individuals do work from home. So but I know building rapport, or like, so for example, when you start a new project, building rapport with your client is vital, right? That relationship building. Are there any tips that you could give folks that are listening for how to build those relationships when you are remote? And maybe, so let's say you're not in the same state or not in the same country. So let's say I was on a project with you. I'm all the way here in the US. You're all the way over there in the UK. Let's say let's say you are the director of infrastructure. I'm throwing just random titles out there. And I need to build rapport with you. What are some things that I can do from a different location, and still build that rapport, build that trust, get you to see that I am authentic? And I mean, because I feel like sometimes I definitely had this experience in my career where I was remote. And so I do often turn on my camera for that exact reason, to build that rapport. But what else can individuals who want to build that rapport virtually, what can they do?
Okay. Okay. Well, first and foremost, Parmjit, thanks for promoting me. Director of Infrastructure is a very grand. So happy to have taken that title. Well, we touched on some of it already. If you are going to be virtual, then yeah, do turn your cameras on, even if it's just you and one other person. And generally speaking, and in some of the projects that I do, I have what's known as a pre-kickoff call, where it's
Okay.
just a bit more of a casual, informal get together with the customer sponsor, some of the team, some of my partner team, and it's done in a very sort of comfortable way where we just go around the room, introduce ourselves, maybe just share something that's an interesting fact.
Mm-hmm.
And I know people that've got Guinness World Records, or they've got Muhammad Ali's boxing gloves in the background on their Zoom screen. Just find something of a little element of continuity. Now, at the moment in the UK as well as across Europe, it's really easy because we've got the 2024 Euro Football Championships going on. So it's really great for, I don't know if the word banter sort of comes across in the US, but to have that friendly sort of
Yeah.
exchange with European colleagues. And it's a great icebreaker. The classic one from the Brits is all about the weather, because of course it always rains here. But
Yep.
actually, it doesn't. I know you've lived here for a short while as well, so you will know it better than most. I think, to be honest, what you need to do, you've got to develop that relationship. Ask how people are, take a genuine interest. Don't get straight into business straight away. Try and have a bit of a bit of a professional sort of etiquette, but have that sort of light time in there as well. You could say, "Oh, do you know what? I'm just reading this really great book about Alan Mulally, that used to be the CEO at Boeing, and the strife when he took over the Ford Motor Company in 2006." And somebody might have read that book and said, "Mum, did you hear about what he said about watermelon status reports?" And
I
it's like,
have. Yeah,
watermelon. So it's the watermelon
I do.
status report. Okay, that's cool. And so you sort of generate that rapport by getting things that are in common. Finding your natural tribe, and it could be based on families, it could be based on travel, it could be based on
Mm-hmm.
experience. And I think the other great thing, I mean, generally when you're working in projects, is it comes back to something you've already said, Parmjit, is be authentic, build your reputation based on what you say you're going to do. So, if you're going to make commitments, stick to them. Or if you're not, you need to own up and sort of reach out and say, yeah, I know I'm committed to this, but actually I can't do it because. And again, there's nothing worse on virtual meetings than frankly turning up late. It's disrespectful, it's wasting folks' times. I know that it was a bit of a national sport for the westernized culture in any meeting to be slightly late. But if you can use your time effectively, I mean, very often now for me post-COVID, most meetings are 30 minutes when they used to be an hour. So we have become very time efficient. But I think a key thing to the question you asked is have a real genuine interest in that person. Don't just see it as a transactional piece in terms of, I need this from you and I need a status update and you need to give it to me, without getting to know that individual. Because very often we don't know what's going on in other people's lives. And rightly or wrongly, and I think it's wrongly, we often compare our own situation to how others should behave. But we're all unique, we're all different, no one is us. The famous Oscar Wilde quote is, be yourself because everyone else has been taken. So if you can do that, then certainly what I've found, and bear in mind, it took me quite a large chunk of my career to work this out. It might come much easier to some people, that if you start becoming more vulnerable and giving more of yourself, people do come towards you. I know I'm getting into a bit of detail here, but if you share stories about yourself or stories about what you do, that also makes that connection much easier. And the connection is that bridge then which brings trust. And I think once you've got trust with another individual, whether you've met them or not, that is the key thing that you want to hold on to and not destroy, because as we all know, it's so difficult to actually build and gain, but incredibly easy to lose. So,
Oh, for sure. For
so
sure. And no, I absolutely love that. I love that nugget of wisdom, and you're so right that I think authenticity is so important. And I also love that you mentioned the human element, right? The humanness, because that is so important. And I mean, I don't, and again, I don't know if it's like this in the UK, but I know here in the US, oftentimes we were told, leave your problems at the door, right? You don't bring your problems to work with you. But it's like, but I think there's definitely been a shift, and I think that companies are starting to recognize that it's hard to separate your life from business. If for example, right, so, and not to go off topic, but I know somebody, former board member of the PMI Southern Nevada chapter, just passed away. And I was thinking about it all day today. And of course, I'm trying to concentrate on work, but I'm thinking about him. And then I thought to myself, I thought about that old montage that, leave your problems at the door. But then I thought, how do you do that as a human? How can you separate? But I think if you show up and you're authentic and you share, hey, look, this is what I'm going through, I think people can appreciate that, because more often than not, everyone is going through something.
yeah, and just added to that as well, Parmjit, be consistent and treat everyone the same, whether you get on with people or not. I mean, just going back to the disc profile we're talking about, I mean, it's very clear, isn't it, that you meet somebody for the first time and it's either click or clash. And
Yeah.
why is that? Why is it that you can meet someone you've never met and within 5 minutes, it's like you've known them all of your life? Or what's going on there? It's clear there's some sort of harmony or signal in the way that you're interacting that actually works. Whereas for others, it's like, oh, I need to keep away from those type of individuals. But I think, yeah, being consistent in the way that you treat people, because I mean, very often, the small talk when people talk about other people behind their backs and that, it generally doesn't do very good, because if you're thinking, oh, what's that? If that person's saying that about them, what are they saying about me? Let's take that conversation up to ideas, events, something much bigger than just a small talk at the low level. But I know what you mean. That sort of paradigm shift from, back in the day when I first started my career again in the automotive industry. Yeah, you weren't told to bring your problems to work, and if you had issues and problems, it was like, get over it. The fact,
Yeah.
the ability to say, oh, I've got a coach or a therapist helping me get through this. they'd look at you as if, you should go to the funny farm sort of thing and you weren't fit to work there. Whereas these days it's more accepting. And I know mental health is a big, big thing. People
Absolutely.
do need help. People do need support, and people need time, because very often we're all going through the same thing. We probably deal with it in different ways, and we
Yeah,
mask in different ways. And I think the thing to do is just, yeah, be authentic. But at the end of the day, we're all human, and we're all impacted in slightly different ways. But to say that nobody's impacted by something is untrue. And it's just recognizing, that some people have it difficult or are struggling at the moment. And then, not that you need to know the detail, but you just need to come across and sort of interact with them in just that human way, so that you can facilitate that great working environment and arrangement.
of course, and I know folks appreciate that. I folks would appreciate that. Again, that you caring enough to ask about their day, ask about how they're doing, ask about what are some things that interest them. I think that human element is, I think it's understated, and I think it is, it's vital. It's vital to our interactions. And
Yeah.
Nigel, yeah, and something else that you'd mentioned, so I was kind of veering off that topic just a little bit. You'd also mentioned, and I actually put this on my LinkedIn post, you'd mentioned that there was something that was even more fundamental, even more transformational beyond just modifying to manage, right? Like, I think you'd use that exact term. So
I,
can you elaborate a
oh,
little bit on what that is and how that has impacted your professional life?
okay. So fundamentally, just to talk about modify to manage, what do I mean by that? Well, that's first of all recognizing your own sort of characteristics, your traits, and your styles, and how you behave, how you show up for other people, and then recognizing in other people. So first of all, we start with self-awareness, that's ourself, and then it's awareness of other people around us. So the modify to manage piece is actually, as I said before, going from a very detailed person to a more fun-loving, outgoing type thing, to sort of attract yourself to the cheerleaders in your project team, if you will. So that's a modify to manage piece. Um, but actually, I think at the kernel of all of this is that belief and understanding in yourself. Very often we go around with our mask on, which I would call your ego. And I must admit, I was in Lisbon last year for the PMI Lim event, and because it was like sort of Spanish, Portuguese over there, I saw some graffiti on the wall, and it said, "Your ego is not your amigo," which I thought was really funny. And but it's so funny, isn't it? Because when people have ego, they are the only ones that don't see it, but everybody else does. And I think the key thing to do, it's about taking that breastplate off again, that
Yeah.
shield of armor that protects you, and actually leaving that by the door and just showing up and saying, you know, this is me. So I think the thing that's really important is being genuine and authentic within yourself, but that comes at a cost of being vulnerable. But what I would say is, if you're vulnerable without any credibility, then people are probably not going to trust you as much, or probably look down on you. But if you can establish credibility, and again, it comes back to, doing what you say you're going to do, and delivering and getting yourself a reputation for that, then you can share vulnerability and people will relate to it, because they can also sometimes see that hero's journey you've been through when you've been through a particularly difficult time, then come out the other side, a bit like a major character arc all the films we see in Hollywood and everything. And nobody's perfect. And therefore, it's the trials and tribulations. It's how you overcome adversity. What did you do? What you share could be gold dust to someone that may not have done it, or has been through it but couldn't work it out in quite the same way. So it's really valuable in that sense. What they don't want to see is someone that seemingly comes across as all perfect, the armor's all polished, sparkling and shiny. And it's like, oh, this is just a model that I can't sort of relate to. I think sometimes, because we're humans, we're imperfect, and people do like that genuineness about something not being quite perfect. So for me, it's that inner EQ, it's that knowing yourself. And once you do that, and you accept it, by the way. If you can't be kind to yourself, how do you expect other people to be kind to
Yeah.
you? And I do think it's that inner thing. I don't want to get too spiritual about it, because I'm not like that. But the biggest, I think, transformation for me was recognizing, you know, my strengths, my weaknesses, where I excel, the things I need to avoid, where I need to lean on other people for skills and attributes I don't have to make that complete team, and knowing, that, I'm good here for a reason. A bit like on a soccer pitch, that if you're going to play and score goals, the last thing you want to do is be putting in the goals to save goals as the goalkeeper. Same game, same rules, just a different position, and that's where you play to your strengths and you're really good. But you don't want to play in a different position, because you'd actually compromise, your output, or your deliverables or your outcomes. So I think it starts with yourself, and it's really to understand and know what you are. And as I say, it took me quite a few years of my career, because I always had a different opinion of what I thought I was to where I actually am. But I'm comfortable with that now, and it helps me. It helps me get grounded, and to get in the right state for various things, so that if I know I'm not very good at something or too phased, I'll just sort of avoid it, park it, or get some help.
No, and I think that's so important. And we're all a work in progress, right? We're constantly changing, we're constantly learning. And I think you shared two very valuable nuggets. One is, leaving your ego. What did you say? You said you read your ego is not your amigo.
That's right. It's graffiti in Lisbon. Yeah, I should have taken a photograph. There's a famous street, and it's lovely, covered in graffiti, which is actually really lovely artwork. Yeah, your ego is not your amigo.
And I couldn't agree more. Honestly, I feel like having an ego becomes such a barrier to building authentic relationships.
Oh,
Right.
definitely.
Right. And I think that's so important. And I also think it's important that you said, you have to, yes, be kind to others, of course, but you have to start with yourself. You have to be kind to yourself. And I think a lot of us forget that. I mean, I'm guilty of that. I know I need to be kinder. I'm very hard on myself. I'm very much perfectionist. But and I think you and I've discussed this a lot. I know I need to be kinder to myself, and that I think is an important message. I hope that a lot of folks who are listening take away from this call,
Yeah,
to practice that kindness, practice it towards we should practice it towards ourselves and practice it towards others. And so,
yeah.
yeah, sorry, go ahead, Nigel.
I was just going to say, Tom, yeah, I'm actually a recovering perfectionist. So I've been to the territory you're at, and I realise that actually perfection doesn't exist. But the one other great piece of advice I'd like to share with your listeners is surround yourself with really great people, or people, not in comparison terms, but people you see as your peers that you can learn something from. All the best mentors, seek someone that's got something that you want, and surround yourself with them. I know we listened to a Tony Robbins podcast, didn't we, a couple of weeks ago, and his famous mentor, Jim Rohn, one of his most famous quotes is, you are the average of the 5 people that you keep the best company with, or the most company. And I really subscribe to that. And I always look out for really great people in that social circle to sort of bring me up. So just wanted to share that as well.
Yeah, no, a great piece of advice, because I think I've learned that from you. I've learned that from several people, and I definitely practice that. I definitely have some individuals in my personal life who get annoyed that I mean, for example, I have a lot of individuals who might invite me to events, to parties, etc. And I go to as many as I can, but oftentimes I prefer not to. Instead, if I can attend a business event with like-minded individuals in which I'm learning and growing, my preference is to attend that. So a great piece of advice. And so, Nigel, as we're wrapping up, if you could give advice, if so, to anyone who's listening to this episode, and I think you have shared so much value, what advice would you give to our listeners who want to improve their own professional relationships? And sorry, excuse me, one second. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Did you hear that last part? We got a little bit of interruption.
No, could you repeat that?
Okay, sure. I'm so sorry. So, what advice would you give to our listeners who want to improve their own professional relationships, right? As well as their project outcomes by understanding those four roles that you mentioned, right? The commander, the cheerleader, the critical
Yeah,
thinker, and I
yeah.
forget, and there's
The
one more.
carer, the carer.
Yes,
Very
yes.
important one. The carer is a really important one.
Uh,
Yeah, I think sometimes, and I do this in the work environment at the moment. I reach out to individuals and just have one-to-ones, a little bit like what we're doing now, just to get to know them in a very informal setting, albeit through Zoom or Teams, and just have that conversation, get to know each other a little bit better. Really does help that project dynamic, and it's incredibly difficult to get that real rapport with people virtually if you haven't met them first. And
yeah,
generally, as you'll know, if you meet someone, then whatever relationship you have with them afterwards, if it's all virtual, it's fine because actually you've met them and you know them. It is a little bit more difficult to do online, but we've been through a few tips on how to achieve that. But yeah, it's. I mean, I've learned it. It's to be. Kind of let you tell you something funny. I had a psychometric test very early in my career, and one of the things they said, and you're probably suffering from it a little bit now with me, Palmjit, they said I was gregarious. And I thought, gosh, that sounds like a really nasty disease. I don't even know what it means. And it's got the propensity to talk a lot. And it's like, but that's a social thing, right? And so
yeah,
I think there's a good element in there. So it's really but also to check with the other person that you're not, overtaking the conversation, not doing too much. I mean, one of the other things I've learned to do is hopefully a lot of better active listening to allow the other person to speak. But if getting the right results is really important to you, getting to know the people first would be the absolute first number one tip. And of course, in the project world, you work with a variety of different people. You sometimes don't work with the same team on different projects. All customers are different. I always try and set the levels of where trust is at when I first meet them. But you can't do it without saying anything. You can't do it without your camera on. You can't do it by being muted. It takes work. And like I said at the start, Palmjit, it's difficult for some styles particularly the introvert styles, to come out and be more verbal. Okay. But once you put yourself in an uncomfortable place and become comfortable by being uncomfortable, and you see the results you get and also the feedback you get from your peers, trusted peers, then you start to believe that you're making a change and making a difference. It's not an overnight thing, or certainly it wasn't for me, but I can say that has worked for me, but it's taken some time. But you have to put yourself out there. You've got to start out by saying, what is it I want to achieve? How do I need to get to know these people better? How can I move more towards them? And as I say, there's a lot of resources out there on the internet around DISC and a lot of these other behavioral profile systems. I'd take some of them with a pinch of salt, maybe, but some of them are quite accurate and give you some great tips and techniques on how to look at yourself and also how to look at other people as well.
yeah. No, absolutely. And I think you've shared such there's so many great takeaways from this episode. I've seen you cover this exact topic in person, and it's great hearing it again and kind of getting a refresher on those different personality types. And even as I'm sitting here listening to you talk, I'm thinking about how I can apply some of these things to my current relationships, both personal as well as professional. And the only other thing that I would add is which I think is equally important. And I think you've mentioned this in some of our personal talks. I think it's also important to understand when folks are interacting with one another, whether it's in personal or whether it's a business relationship, understanding the different cultural dynamics
Of course.
that may be at play. And I think that's another reason that as you mentioned, it's so important to keep your camera on. So if I'm speaking with somebody, for example, if I were to speak with somebody maybe from my parents' country of India, there may be a, for example, and I use this example often. I know, and then this is not to, and I want to say this, I want to preface this by saying that this is not true for everyone, of course. But I know a lot of times when I deal with folks from India, I know typically looking somebody in the eyes is considered almost a sign of disrespect, especially if that individual is your senior, right? Whereas here in the United States, if you're not looking somebody in the eyes, it can be seen as inauthenticity, or that you're trying to hide something, or that you're not trustable. So I would just put that out there also. That's important to understand difference in um, the way different cultures communicate, as well as how different generations communicate, which we touched on a little bit earlier.
Yeah, most definitely. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because again, in the Western world, eye contact is seen as a good indicator of trust. Very often if people aren't looking you in the eyes, then it's a sign that they're trying to hide something, as you say. So absolutely, there's a cultural dimension to some of this as well. And we all have our cultural idiosyncrasies in the way that we act and behave. And yeah, it is another powerful thing to be aware of, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Nigel, I want to thank you again, number one, for being my first international guest,
Oh, wow. That's good.
my first YouTube guest. And I want to also thank you for being a friend. I think throughout the time that we've known each other, you have shared such incredible insights and wisdom with me. And I'm glad that today you were able to share it with our audience as well. So thank you so much for being on today.
You're very welcome there, Parmjit. And let's not forget, we've got some unfinished business as well. There's still some great stuff we can do into the future as well. And I'm sure that that'll take us to some great places as well. But thanks so much for taking time out to spend time with me. I trust that it's been useful to your listeners. And have a good, happy life, and live well.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Very well. Thank you. Cheers.